Hello, this is a very quick brief guide on some painting, well actually airbrushing that I've done on these epic 40k Dreadnought models. I am actually experimenting here with some of Lifecolor models in this range that they do where you get a contrast and desaturation set. You get three different colours in there. These ones are for the Panzer grey colours. You get a flashed shade, which is a lighter shade, a ground colour and a deep shade. I'm now going on with the ground colour at the moment, which is the middle grey shade, which is their reference number UA253. And like I said, I'm experimenting, so I'm trying to work out whether on such a small model it's worth even doing this kind of saturation and trying to do it really quickly as well. So I'm using an Iwata HPC Plus airbrush, and you can see me dropping in there the grey colour, and I use those droppers because they're the best possible method of transferring paint from a pot into the reservoir on your airbrush. So just here on my Iwata airbrush, I'm just doing a quick test spray onto some paper, or you could do that on card. It's worth doing that before you head on to the actual model. And of course this is an epic scale figure, so it's very tiny. I'm sorry you're not getting a very good close-up, but you can see the paint going on there just about, and hopefully if you increase the res on this whilst you're watching on YouTube, you should be able to see it relatively close up. So the idea with this Panzer Grey 3-colour set from Lifecolor is that you go on first of all with the ground colour. So I've used Tamiya grey fine primer on these models initially, and then I've gone on with the ground colour, which is Panzer Grey ground colour UA253, and then I'll go and use the deeper shade on the shadowed areas like the legs under the walker, and then I'll use the flash shade on the top. So that's generally the idea. With such a small model you could actually probably get down to very fine detail and do graduated shading on the panels. I'm not going to that level of detail here. I'm just simply using the three shades in the most speedy way that I can imagine, which is the lighter ones from the top and the darker underneath on the legs and the underside of the panels. So you can see with this ground colour I'm going all over the model initially. As with any airbrushing job, the first colour that you put on, the base colour that covers the whole model, you want to get a really good covering and not leave any gaps. So I'm taking a lot of care to go into the tiny crevices between the Dreadnoughts armour panelling, and then I also, because I'm using this magnetic Corsair holder and the base of the model is metal, I'm able to sort of turn it upside down almost. Unfortunately, of course, for turning it upside down I do get some of the base in the way, but I can sort of work around that with the fine flow of paint from the Iwata airbrush. It is worth bearing in mind with almost all airbrushing jobs is that the airbrushing is the sort of first phase. It's the phase that gets you the bulk of the paint job done. You get the whole model covered. You can do some, obviously what I'm doing here is doing some basic shading when I add on the darker and lighter colours. You then follow that initial spraying with weathering, decals and other sort of chips, and you can also do dry brushing and highlighting. So once you've got that basic coat on, it gives you the opportunity to add the extra layer of detail. I'll follow up with another video after this where I do the weathering so you can see the models coming together a bit better. So there it is with the base coat on. Try and get it into focus here. Almost. There we go. It's kind of a dark grey, so you're not going to see that very well. I haven't got the light on it very well either, but I've given it a decent first coat, and then I go ahead now and do the same on the rest of the models I've got in the set. So what I've done now is you can see I'm practicing with another colour now. This is the darker grey in the set, the one they call the deep shade in the Lifecolor pack. And you can see I'm just angling it in on the underside, on the legs, bottom of the torso of the Dreadnought, the bottom of the arms, underneath the back, and you see I angle the model down so that the airbrush flow is going up into the underside of any of the metalwork on the back. Before I used the dropper to put the darker shade into the reservoir on the airbrush, I sprayed a whole pot of water, well, filled the reservoir up with water and sprayed that through. That actually cleaned it out nicely. I didn't even have to use any cleaning fluid. If I'm lucky on an airbrushing session and I'm using similar colours, I won't actually bother with the cleaning fluid clean out until I've finished all of my airbrushing. So I try and flush with water as much as possible. And this is a really key tip actually. Quite often in the early days of my airbrushing 4 or 5 years ago, I'd end up with blockages, and that was due to over enthusiasm with the cleaning fluid. So I'd do things like I'd have a spot of paint still left in the bottom of the reservoir, and instead of flushing it out with water, I'd pour the cleaning fluid straight in, and that would make the paint go goopy and gunky as it started to break it down. And in fact, so what I was causing was more blockages by using the fluids too early. So it's always best to try and flush as much out with water, especially with the acrylics I'm using here. So I've now switched to the lightest shade, and I'm just doing a little test on the piece of tissue again. As I was saying before, the lighter shade is going to go right on the top of the models, so I'll be spraying down onto it. This is a little Ground Zero Games Mecha Walker in 6mm scale, so I'm just starting with that, and again spraying from the top so that this light shade is just on the upper areas of the panels on this very small model. I'll tell you one thing I found is that with this small epic scale of model, it was very difficult to get my head around the idea that I needed to go in a bit closer. So you can see here I'm probably too far away from the subject with the brush. I mean, it's working okay. You can see very vaguely that the lighter grey is on the top panels there, but generally speaking, I need to probably move my airbrushing closer when dealing with models of this size. So I've just clipped one of the Dreadnoughts onto the magnetic base, which is from a company called Corsec. In fact, those magnetic bases are for flight bases for miniatures, like the Aeronef models I showed in a previous video. It just so happens that it would be nearly impossible really to hold onto the base of that model and airbrush it. You do need something to clip it onto, a stand, crocodile clips or something, to make sure you've got a decent way of maneuvering it around without getting your hands onto the actual model. So that's phase 1 sort of finished on the 5 models I had. So overall it probably took 15 to 20 minutes of airbrushing to do. Well, in fact there were 6 epic models, 5 Dreadnoughts and 1 of the Ground Zero Games models. So you're looking, with other prep time, around about 30-35 minutes to do the complete base spray coat on these 3 models with the 3 shades on. So here they are after the airbrushing, and I've started some of the detailing by putting some metal onto the exhausts and weapons. Otherwise I've not done anything else. I need to actually start looking at now doing a wash and some detailing to bring out some of the highlights on them. Thanks for listening through to the end.